The silence inside the grand oculum of the Zalanthian High Council was not merely an absence of sound. It was a physical weight, a pressurized atmospheric layer that pressed against the chitinous armor of every dignitary present, threatening to crush their respiratory vents under the sheer gravity of the moment. Above them, suspended in the center of the vast, spherical chamber where the air shimmered with the particulate dust of crushed gemstones, floated the holographic rendering of the intruder. To the aesthetic sensibilities of the Zalanthia, and indeed to every member species of the Galactic Concordat, the vessel was an abomination of design, a geometric insult to the elegant curves of hyperspace aerodynamics. It was a brutalist brick of dull gray metal, scarred by micrometeoroids, devoid of the shimmering energy shields that denoted a civilized species, and bristling with exposed conduits that leaked waste heat into the vacuum like a wounded animal bleeding out. It possessed no grace, no artifice, and seemingly no understanding of the subtler laws of physics that allowed the Concordat's sleek, needle-like dreadnoughts to slip through the dimensional folds like silk through water. This object, this thing that had drifted into the sacred exclusion zone of the Cygnus Rift, was undeniably primitive. High Archon Malker, his carapace gleaming with the iridescent polish of office, gestured a manipulator limb toward the projection with a motion that conveyed both dismissal and profound irritation. He looked down upon the assembly from his raised dais, his compound eyes refracting the ambient light into 1,000 fragments of judgment. To him, the arrival of this Terran vessel, the UNS Indomitable, as the crude radio bursts had identified it, was less of a military threat and more of a diplomatic nuisance, a piece of space junk that had the audacity to be inhabited. The sheer size of the vessel was its only notable feature, a sprawling, rectangular prism of reinforced tritanium that displaced enough volume to rival a small moon. Yet its energy signature was bafflingly low, almost dormant, pulsing with the rhythmic, thumping cadence of nuclear fusion. A technology the Concordat had abandoned 10,000 cycles ago as dirty, dangerous, and woefully inefficient. The whispers began in the lower tiers of the oculum, a susurrus of clicking mandibles and synthesized vocalizations from the aquatic delegates in their suspension tanks. They were debating the nature of the intruder, mocking its reliance on kinetic propulsion, laughing at the visible reaction control thrusters that spewed chemical fire into the void. It was a chariot of barbarians, a floating tomb of desperate creatures who had clearly exhausted their home world's resources and were now dragging themselves across the stars in a metal coffin, looking for scraps. Science Minister Lyra, a slender and cerebral representative of the psionic caste, felt a distinct ripple of unease beneath the mockery of her peers. She stood near the sensory pits, her long, delicate fingers hovering over the fluid interface controls, reading the raw data streams that the military filters usually smoothed over for the comfort of the high command. While Malker and the generals saw a primitive hulk, Lyra saw anomalies that defied the standard models of propulsion. The ship was heavy, far heavier than its material composition should allow. The gravitational displacement sensors were screaming, painting a picture of a vessel that possessed the mass of a neutron star singularity, yet it moved with the inertia of a standard frigate. It was a contradiction in terms, a physical impossibility that suggested either a malfunction in the Concordat's sensors or a manipulation of physics so profound that it looked like incompetence to the uninitiated. She tried to voice her concern, sending a telepathic pulse of caution to the Archon, but Malker brushed it aside with a mental wall of arrogance, his mind shielded by centuries of dogma that stated clearly, only the Concordat held the keys to the higher dimensions. The debate in the chamber shifted from curiosity to aggression as the human vessel continued its slow, inexorable drift toward the perimeter of the rift, the volatile tier in spacetime that the Concordat guarded with religious fervor. The rift was a grave of ships, a zone of chaotic energy where the laws of reality broke down, and it was strictly forbidden territory. The human ship was not responding to the standard navigational hazards. It was plowing through radiation belts that would have cooked the crew of a standard vessel, yet its hull temperature barely fluctuated. Malker ordered the transmission of the third and final warning, a burst of hyperwave data that would overload the communication arrays of any lesser species, effectively shouting them down into submission. The response from the Indomitable was anticlimactic. It was audio only, a flat analog signal that crackled. With static, carrying the voice of a biological male speaking a dialect of galactic common that sounded archaic, full of hard consonants and weary intonation. The message was simple, maddeningly calm, and devoid of the groveling fear that usually accompanied a species' first encounter with the Concordats might. This is Captain Vance of the United Nations Space Command vessel Indomitable. We copy your beacon. We are currently engaged in critical operations and cannot alter course. We request you maintain a safe distance of 1 light second to avoid navigational turbulence. Out. The sheer audacity stunned the oculum into silence for a heartbeat, followed immediately by an uproar of indignation. They were ordering the Concordat to stand back. They, the masters of the sector, were being told to mind their distance by a species that was literally burning dead dinosaurs to move their ship. General Thrax, a hulking warrior of the Krail species, slammed his fist onto the podium, the impact reverberating through the floor plates. He demanded authorization to fire, to turn this insolent brick into a cloud of expanding vapor as a lesson in hierarchy. Malker, feeling the pressure of the assembly and his own bruised ego, nodded slowly. He did not want a war, for a war implied 2 equal sides. This was to be an extermination, a pest control measure. The order was given. The Concordat flagship, the Ascendant Glory, a masterpiece of curved white alloy and singing energy fields, brought its primary particle lances to bear. The weapon was capable of dissecting a planet's crust, a beam of coherent bosons that dismantled matter at the atomic level. The targeting computers locked onto the center of mass of the human block. There was no attempt to evade from the humans, no flare of shields, no counterfire. They simply continued their slow forward momentum, engines thrumming with that rhythmic, primitive heartbeat. When the beam fired, the oculum watched in anticipation of the brilliant flash that would signal the end of the annoyance. The lance of pure white energy bridged the gap between the ships in an instant, striking the flat, scarred flank of the Indomitable. But there was no explosion, there was no vapor. The beam struck the gray hull and simply stopped. It didn't reflect, it didn't disperse. It was absorbed. The metal of the human ship seemed to drink the energy, the impact point glowing a dull, angry cherry red for a fraction of a second before fading back to cold gray. The sensors on the Ascendant Glory shrieked warnings as the energy output of the weapon was drained into a bottomless sink. The human ship hadn't deployed a shield. It had acted as a perfect heat sink, a thermodynamic sponge that swallowed the Concordat's wrath without slowing down by a single meter per second. In the oculum, the mood shifted instantly from arrogance to confusion. General Thrax stared at the tactical display, his mandibles twitching. He ordered a full barrage. Missiles tipped with antimatter warheads, plasma torpedoes, and gravity shear projectors were launched in a swarm that would have overwhelmed a peer-level adversary. The space between the 2 fleets lit up with the chaotic brilliance of modern warfare, a fireworks display of destruction converging on the silent, ugly box. Lyra watched the telemetry with widening eyes, her mind racing to comprehend what she was seeing. As the munitions approached the human vessel, they didn't detonate against the hull. They detonated around it. A field of some kind, not an energy shield, but a distortion of space itself, caught the projectiles kilometers out. The antimatter warheads exploded in containment bubbles that collapsed in on themselves, their energy neutralized, turned into harmless radiation that the ship then seemed to harvest. The gravity shears, weapons designed to tear ships apart by pulling the bow and stern in opposite directions, washed over the Indomitable like water over a smooth stone. The ship's internal gravity didn't waver. It was an immovable object. "It's not a shield," Lyra whispered, her voice cutting through the rising panic of the generals. "It's density. They aren't blocking the attacks. They are ignoring them. The ship, it has the mass of a planetary core. By all rights, its gravity should be tearing us apart, but they've confined the field to the skin of their hull. It's impossible. They have localized gravity control so precise they can walk through a supernova without feeling the heat." Malker turned to her, fear finally cracking his composure. "What are you saying, Minister? That they are invincible?" "I am saying," Lyra replied, her voice trembling as she realized the implications, "that we are throwing stones at a mountain, and the mountain doesn't care." The Indomitable was now passing the Ascendant Glory. The sheer scale of the human vessel became apparent as it eclipsed the stars, casting a shadow over the Concordat fleet. It was a moving city, a fortress of solitude. And then, for the first time, the humans took offensive action, or what the aliens perceived as offensive action. The massive, blocky prow of the ship opened. Great mechanical irises dilated, revealing not weapon ports, but emitters of a size that dwarfed the Concordat's largest capital ships. "They are charging main weapons," Thrax roared, ordering the fleet to scatter. Evasive maneuvers, all power to forward screens. But the humans did not fire on the fleet. The emitters glowed with a color that didn't exist in the visible spectrum, a deep, bruising violet that hurt the eyes to look at even through the holographic filters. A beam of focused resonance shot out, not at the Concordat ships, but forward, directly into the Cygnus Rift. The rift, a swirling storm of chaotic energy that had plagued the sector for eons, reacted violently. The human beam hit the center of the anomaly, and the fabric of space began to scream. The sensors in the oculum went blind with white noise. The diplomats cowered, expecting the end. They thought the humans were destabilizing the rift to destroy the entire system. It was the ultimate weapon, a suicide pact. But as the light faded and the sensors recalibrated, the silence returned, heavier than before. The rift was changing. The chaotic swirls were straightening, the violent radiation storms were calming. The tear in spacetime was being stitched shut. The beam wasn't a weapon of destruction, it was a welding torch. The humans were repairing the vacuum itself. "High Command, this is indomitable," the voice of Captain Vance returned, sounding slightly strained now, breathless as if he were holding a heavy weight. "Engineering cycle initiated. We are stabilizing the local manifold. The feedback loop from your weapons fire actually helped top off our capacitors, so thanks for that, I guess. But seriously, clear the area. If the resonance cascades, your shields won't hold." The realization hit Malker like a physical blow. They weren't invaders. They weren't scavengers. They were maintenance workers. The Concordat, in all its glory and arrogance, ruling 1,000 stars, was nothing more than a localized infestation of ants living on a highway, and the humans were the road crew coming to fix a pothole. The humiliation was absolute, but it was quickly replaced by a cold, creeping dread. If this was their maintenance ship, what did their warships look like? And more importantly, what kind of damage were they repairing that required a vessel of such terrifying power? The hours that followed were a blur of diplomatic confusion and terrified observation. The Concordat fleet withdrew to a safe distance, watching as the Indomitable performed feats of stellar engineering that defied the Concordat's understanding of theoretical physics. The humans manipulated the fundamental constants of the universe as if they were turning dials on a radio. They smoothed out gravitational waves, tied off fraying quantum strings, and reinforced the barrier between real space and the hyperspace underlayer. Lyra, driven by an insatiable curiosity that overrode her fear, commandeered a small shuttle and approached the human vessel, broadcasting a hail on the open frequency. She expected to be vaporized, or at least ignored. Instead, she received a docking clearance. The hangar bay she entered was cavernous, smelling of ozone, machine oil, and old coffee, a stark contrast to the sterile, scented air of Concordat ships. She was met not by soldiers in power armor, but by engineers in grease-stained jumpsuits. They were shorter than the Xylanthia, softer without exoskeletons, but they moved with a purpose and solidity that was intimidating. Captain Vance met her on the deck. He was an older human, his face lined with fatigue, his eyes dark and intelligent. He didn't bow, didn't posture. He just offered a hand, a gesture Lyra's translation matrix identified as a greeting. "You're the one who realized we weren't shooting at you," Vance said, his voice gravelly. "Took you long enough. My tactical officer was betting we'd have to slap your flagship to get you to back off." We thought you were invaders," Lyra stammered, her translator struggling to convey her embarrassment. "Your ship, it registers as primitive, no shields, combustion drives." Vance chuckled, a dry sound. "Shields are a waste of power when you have hull plating made of collapsed matter. And the drives? We don't use fusion to move, ma'am. We use fusion to keep the coffee hot and the lights on. The ship moves by falling. We project a micro-singularity in front of us and fall toward it. Perpetual motion, infinitely scalable. It looks slow to you because we're constantly braking to avoid tearing your solar system apart with our wake." He led her through the ship, and Lyra saw wonders that made her head spin. She saw the core, a trapped star, contained within a magnetic bottle the size of a thimble. She saw the crew, families living and bored, children playing in parks that mimicked the gravity and sunlight of a world called Earth. This wasn't just a ship. It was a generational ark, a wandering monastery dedicated to the preservation of the cosmos. "Why?" Lyra asked, stopping in a corridor that looked out over the vast machinery repairing the rift. "Why do you do this? You have the power to conquer the galaxy. With one of these ships, you could subjugate the Concordat in a week. Yet you hide, you look like junk, you let us mock you." Vance stopped and looked at her, his expression turning somber. He walked to the viewport and stared out at the swirling colors of the healing rift. "We tried the Empire thing once," he said softly. "Long time ago. We conquered, we expanded, we built shiny white ships just like yours. We thought we were the masters of the universe. We got arrogant. We thought we could shout louder than the dark." He turned back to her. "But then we found out what's actually out there. The universe isn't a playground, Minister. It's a dam. A leaking, cracking dam holding back an ocean of entropy that wants to dissolve everything into cold gray sludge. The structural integrity of reality is failing. Stars are dying before their time. Gravity wells are unraveling. Someone has to fix it." "So you became janitors?" Lyra asked, the concept alien to her glory-obsessed culture. "Custodians," Vance corrected. "Guardians. We realized that ruling the galaxy doesn't matter if the galaxy falls apart, so we stripped our ships of the vanity, the gold paint, the ego. We built them to last, to endure, to work. We armor them to survive the collapse of stars, not to fight petty wars over borders. We don't care if you underestimate us. In fact, we prefer it. It means you leave us alone to do the work." The revelation struck Lyra with the force of a religious epiphany. The humans were not primitive. They were post-imperial. They had evolved beyond the need for conquest, finding purpose in service to existence itself. They were the adults in a room full of squabbling children, quietly reinforcing the walls of the nursery while the children fought over toys. Back in the oculum, the mood remained tense. Malker watched the repairs nearing completion, his paranoia whispering that this was all a trick, a prelude to an invasion. He couldn't conceive of a species that possessed such power without the desire to use it for domination. It broke his worldview. If power wasn't for ruling, what was it for? Suddenly the sensors spiked, not from the human ship but from the rift itself. A tier had opened that the humans hadn't reached yet, and something was coming through. It wasn't a ship, it was a claw, a massive, shadowy appendage of non-baryonic matter forcing its way into their dimension. The ancient legends of the Concordat spoke of the void dwellers, entities from the space between spaces, hungry ghosts that consumed consciousness. They were myths, stories to frighten larvae. But now, one was pushing through the weakened fabric of the Cygnus sector. The Concordat fleet opened fire. Their weapons, formidable against physical matter, passed harmlessly through the shadow entity. The creature lashed out, a whip of darkness that sliced the Ascendant glory in half. The flagship detonated, a silent blossom of fire that was instantly snuffed out by the entity's aura. Panic erupted in the oculum. The greatest warship of the hegemony was gone in seconds. The fleet broke formation, ships fleeing in terror. "Vance," Lyra screamed into her comms, still aboard the Indomitable. "The rift, something is coming through." "We see it," Vance's voice was calm, terrifyingly so. "Class 4 extra-dimensional intrusion. We were wondering when the noise would attract one of them." "We have to flee," Lyra cried. "It destroyed the flagship, nothing can hurt it." "Sit down, Minister," Vance said, "and put on your goggles." The Indomitable shifted. It didn't turn, it rotated on its axis with a groan of tortured metal. The repair beams cut off. The front of the ship, the great geometric brick, began to reconfigure. The hull plates shifted, sliding back to reveal a cavity deep within the vessel's superstructure. It wasn't a gun. It was a bell. A massive resonance chamber made of a crystal Lyra didn't recognize. "We don't fight these things with lasers," Vance explained over the comms, his voice echoing in the hangar. "They are beings of dissonance. They exist to disrupt the harmony of physics. To kill them, you don't shoot them, you correct them." The Indomitable pulsed. A sound, felt more than heard, washed over the sector. It was a pure, absolute note, a frequency that resonated with the fundamental string vibration of the universe. It was the sound of order. The shadow creature recoiled, its form shimmering. It lashed out at the human ship, striking the hull with enough force to shatter a moon. The Indomitable shuddered, alarms blaring, sparks raining down in the hangar, but it held. The primitive density armor absorbed the blow, the ship's mass acting as an anchor against the storm. "Harmonics at 120%, Vance ordered. "Pulse it." The ship fired again, not a beam, but a wave of reality enforcing logic. Where the wave hit the shadow ceased to be shadow and was forced to become matter. The entity shrieked, a psychic scream that drove half the council to their knees as it was forcibly calcified. The humans were forcing it to obey the laws of physics. They were dragging a ghost into the material world and crushing it under the weight of existence. The creature solidified, turning from a terrifying void beast into a statue of twisted, gray carbon. It floated dead in space, a monument to its own hubris. The silence that followed was different this time. It was the silence of awe. The indomitable, battered, leaking atmosphere from a dozen breaches, its hull scorched and dented, drifted silently near the corpse of the god monster it had just killed with a math equation. Vance's voice returned to the open channel, sounding exhausted. Target neutralized. Structural integrity of the sector is stable. We are venting drive plasma to seal hull breaches. Requesting the Concordat keep the area clear for 24 standard hours while we finish the patch job on the rift. And if you could tow your debris out of the flight path, we'd appreciate it. In the oculum, High Archon Malker sat slumped on his throne. The arrogance was gone, burned away by the violet light of the human weapon. He looked at the primitive, ugly block of a ship and he finally understood. It wasn't ugly. It was utilitarian. It was a hammer. And you don't ask a hammer to be beautiful, you ask it to be hard. The Council voted unanimously to grant the Terran Union unrestricted access to all Concordat space. Not out of friendship, but out of a desperate, terrifying gratitude. They realized now that while they played at being kings, the humans were the ones holding the roof up. Lyra remained on the Indomitable as it prepared to depart. She stood on the bridge with Vance, watching the starfield. "Where will you go next?" she asked. "There's a gravity shear developing in the Andromeda sector," Vance said, looking at a datapad that seemed as old as he was. "Nasty business. Could swallow a few inhabited systems if we don't stitch it up. It's a thankless job, but the benefits include seeing the universe." "Can I come?" Lyra asked. The words left her mouth before she could process them. She was a minister of the High Council, a member of the elite. But the thought of returning to the oculum, to the petty debates and the false grandeur, felt like death. Vance looked at her, studying her with those dark, tired eyes. He smiled, a genuine expression this time. "We're not a luxury liner, kid. The food is synthetic, the gravity fluctuates, and we work 18-hour shifts, and most of the galaxy thinks we're garbage scavengers." "I know," Lyra said. "I want to help fix the dam." Vance nodded slowly. "Welcome aboard, crewman. Grab a wrench. We leave in 10. As the Indomitable spooled up its Singularity drive, the Concordat fleet formed a line, an honor guard. They didn't understand the humans fully, and they certainly still feared them. But as the gray brick vanished into the fold of space, falling toward its own artificial horizon, every alien captain saluted. They had underestimated the ship because it looked like a rock, never realizing that it was the rock upon which their safety was built. The twist, however, came weeks later. Malker, reviewing the data Lyra had sent back before her departure, found an encrypted file. It was a frantic message from the human high command to Captain Vance, dated just before the battle with the shadow creature. It wasn't an order to repair the rift. It read, "Captain, sensors indicate the Cygnus Rift is not a natural formation. It is a breach point. The Void Dwellers aren't invading randomly. They are fleeing. Something else has entered the void between galaxies, something that scares the monsters. Seal the gate. Seal it now. We cannot let the hunters through." Malker stared at the screen, his blood running cold. The humans hadn't just killed a monster. They had locked a door. And whatever was on the other side, whatever was hunting the horrors that terrified the Concordat, was still out there. And the humans knew. That was why they were so calm. That was why they were unstoppable. They weren't fighting for territory. They were fighting a delaying action against the end of time. And the Indomitable, for all its power, was just one ship in a fleet of thousands, spreading out into the dark, armed with wrenches and physics, trying to keep the lights on for just one more day. The High Archon looked up at the eternal night sky, which suddenly felt very large and very, very fragile. He realized then that humanity wasn't the calm neighbor. They were the desperate soldiers in a trench, and the Est of the galaxy was just the village behind the lines, blissfully unaware that the artillery had already started falling. The true weight of the situation settled into the marrow of the Concordat's leadership over the ensuing cycles. The departure of Lyra and the revelation of the Hunters created a schism in the Xylanthian society. The comfortable arrogance that had sustained them for millennia began to rot from the inside. Debates in the oculum were no longer about trade, tariffs, or border disputes. They were about survival. Philosophers and scientists pored over the data logs of the Indomitable, trying to reverse engineer the density plating and the reality stitching beams. But they lacked the fundamental perspective shift required. The Concordat science was built on the elegant manipulation of existing forces. Human science, it seemed, was built on the brute force coercion of the universe to sit down and shut up. Meanwhile, deep in the interstellar void, far from the warmth of any star, the Indomitable continued its vigil. Lyra, now clad in a human-issue flight suit that hung loosely on her tall, slender frame, was learning the art of percussive maintenance. She found a strange satisfaction in it. There was an honesty to the human way. If a conduit was leaking, you sealed it. If a star was wobbling, you stabilized it. There was no politics in engineering, only pass or fail. One rotation, while scrubbing the filters of the primary sensor array, Lyra picked up a signal. It was faint, buried in the cosmic background radiation, a ghostly whisper that shouldn't have been there. She tuned the array, her new skills allowing her to filter out the static of the nebula they were traversing. The signal wasn't random. It was a sequence, a countdown. She brought it to Vance. The captain was in the mess hall, staring into a cup of black coffee as if it held the secrets of the universe. He listened to the signal, his face hardening into a mask of stone. "It's a distress beacon," Vance said quietly, "but not from a ship." "From where?" Lyra asked. "From a galaxy," Vance replied. "Triangulum, it's gone dark." Lyra checked the astrometric charts. Triangulum was a neighbor to the Milky Way, a vibrant spiral of billions of stars. "What do you mean, gone dark?" "I mean the stars are going out," Vance said, standing up. "One by one, faster than light speed, which means it's a causal chain reaction. The hunters found a way in." The atmosphere on the Indomitable shifted instantly. The low-level hum of routine maintenance vanished, replaced by the sharp electric tension of combat readiness. This wasn't a repair job anymore. This was a containment breach. Vance ordered the fleet to assemble. It was the first time Lyra realized that the Indomitable could call for help. She expected other brick-like ships to arrive. What she saw on the long-range sensors made her gasp. The human fleet wasn't just humans. It was a motley collection of vessels from a dozen species the Concordat had deemed extinct or primitive. There were the rock ships of the lithids, the biological bioships of the aquasphere, and geometric energy constructs of the plasmids. They had all been recruited, all janitors working under the guidance of the Terran Union. Humanity hadn't conquered them, they had unionized them. They had built a coalition of the willing, a brotherhood of the wrench and the hammer. "We are the immune system of the local cluster," Vance explained as the fleet gathered in the deep void. "When a virus enters, the white blood cells swarm. We are the white cells." The destination was the edge of the galactic halo, looking out toward the void separating them from Triangulum. The view was terrifying. Where there should have been the faint, fuzzy light of a neighbor galaxy, there was a growing patch of absolute blackness. It looked like a bruise on the face of the universe, and the bruise was spreading. "The hunters consume entropy," Vance briefed the assembled captains. "They feed on the breakdown of order. They accelerate the heat death of the universe so they can nest in the cold. If they reach the Milky Way, they will turn every star into an ice cube within a century." The plan was insane. It was classic human insanity. They couldn't fight the hunters directly. The hunters were arguably forces of nature, not biological entities. So the humans planned to build a firebreak. They were going to detonate a line of dead stars along the galactic rim, creating a wall of hyperexcited plasma and chaotic radiation so dense that even the entropy eaters would choke on it. It was a scorched earth policy on a galactic scale. "We have to burn the forest to save the village," Vance said grimly. Lyra was assigned to the Indomitable's weapon systems. Her psychic aptitude allowed her to interface with the targeting computers faster than any human. She felt the weight of the trigger under her mental command. They were about to destroy Lar systems. Uninhabited, yes, dead systems, but the sheer scale of the destruction was nauseating. "Steady, Minister," Vance's voice came over the comms. "It's just demolition work, controlled blasting." As the fleet moved into position, the first wave of the hunters arrived. They didn't look like the shadow beast from the rift. They looked like silence. They were absences of light, slivers of nothing that moved through the vacuum, erasing whatever they touched. Asteroids vanished. Gas clouds ceased to exist. They were the erasers. "Open fire," Vance commanded. The fleet unleashed hell, but not the focused beams of the Concordat. They fired mass driver rounds the size of skyscrapers. They fired singularity bombs. They fired weaponized solar flares. It was messy, loud, and brutal. The humans fought like brawlers, throwing dirt in the eyes of the enemy, kicking them in the shins, using every dirty trick in the physics book. Lyra merged her mind with the ship. She felt the impact of the erasers trying to delete the Indomitable. She felt the density plating groaning as it was asked to hold existence together against non-existence. She pushed back, using her psionic will to reinforce the ship's reality stabilizers. "We are here," she screamed into the void. We are real. You cannot delete us. The line of dead stars was ignited. The chain reaction was blinding. A wall of fire, light years long, erupted along the galactic rim. The energy output was greater than the combined output of the entire Concordat civilization for 1,000 years. It was a beacon that would be seen across the universe. The hunters hit the wall and screamed. It wasn't a sound, it was a psychic backlash of frustration. They couldn't consume the energy fast enough, it burned them. The nothingness was filled with too much something. They recoiled, retreating back into the dark void toward the dying triangulum. The fleet held the line. For 3 days they poured fire into the void, maintaining the burn. Ships were lost. The lithid cruiser crumbled into dust. The plasmid construct dissipated, but the Indomitable held. Vance stood on the bridge, bleeding from a nosebleed caused by the gravitational stress, refusing to sit down. He was the anchor. When the smoke cleared, metaphorically speaking, the hunters were gone. The firebreak was stable, a churning river of plasma that would bar entry for 1,000,000 years. The galaxy was safe. The Indomitable limped back to the staging area. It was a wreck. The gray armor was pitted, the engines were whining, and half the systems were offline. But it was alive. Lyra disconnected from the interface, her body trembling with exhaustion. She walked to the bridge. Vance was there, looking at a message from the Concordat. High Archon Malker had sent a transmission. "We saw the light," it said. "We saw the fire at the edge of the world. We offer assistance. We have resources. We have ships. They are pretty and perhaps fragile, but we wish to help build the wall." Vance smiled. It was a tired, broken smile, but it was real. "Tell them to bring cement," he said to the comms officer. "Lots of cement." He turned to Lyra. "You did good, kid. You held the reality matrix together when the primary coil failed. I felt it." "I just didn't want to be deleted," Lyra said, leaning against a console. "Is it always like this? Always 1 second away from the end?" "Pretty much," Vance said, looking out at the stars. "That's the job. The universe wants to end. It's tired. It wants to sleep. Our job is to keep shaking it awake, telling it that it's not bedtime yet." "Why?" Lyra asked. "If it's inevitable, why fight it?" Vance tapped the console, bringing up an image of Earth. Blue, green, fragile. Then he swiped, showing the Xylanthian homeworld. Purple, gold, majestic. Then a dozen other worlds. "Because the kids are still playing," Vance said softly. "And you don't turn off the lights while the kids are still playing." The Indomitable turned its battered prow back toward the core systems. It was ugly. It was slow. It was underestimated by every arrogant empire that saw it. But as it drifted through the dark, engines thumping with the heartbeat of a stubborn, unyielding species, Lyra realized it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. It was the shield. It was the wall. And as long as the humans were willing to be the janitors of the apocalypse, the galaxy might just survive the night. The story of the Indomitable spread. It didn't become a legend of conquest, but a legend of endurance. The Concordat changed. They stopped polishing their ships and started reinforcing their hulls. They stopped debating philosophy and started learning engineering. The Galactic Union of Engineers was formed, a coalition dedicated not to ruling, but to maintaining. And far out in the dark beyond the rim, the hunters watched. They waited, but they learned fear. They learned that in this galaxy the prey didn't run, the prey bit back. Prey carried wrenches, and they knew how to use them. The prey was human, and they were, in their own quiet, grumpy, coffee-drinking way, absolutely unstoppable. Years later, Lyra would stand before a new class of cadets. Humans, Xylanthians, Krail. She would point to the hologram of the gray brick. "This," she would say, "is a warship, not because it has guns, but because it refuses to die. In this universe, existence is an act of rebellion, and this ship, it's the loudest rebel yell in the cosmos. Now pick up your tools, we have a black hole to caulk." The cadets would laugh, nervous but eager. And somewhere, deep in the hull of the Indomitable, Captain Vance, or perhaps his successor, for the mission was eternal, would pour a fresh cup of coffee, look at the sensor board flashing with 1,000 new catastrophes, and get back to work. The underestimated ship drifted on, an eternal guardian in the guise of a garbage scow, carrying the weight of the world on its scarred, gray shoulders.